Welcome to this week's episode of the FullScope Cybercast, Safeguarding the Digital Frontier. I'm your host, Matt Van Pelt, and with me today is FullScope IT's CTO, Dan Welk. How are you, Dan?
Great, Matt. Good to be here.
All right. And also Brian Amadeo from Business Development. How are you today, Brian?
Doing well, Matt. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. And last but certainly not least, Matthew Kelly, a member of the FullScope IT technical team. How are you today, Matthew?
Cold, but I'm here.
Cold, but here. That's the story of that's our story of the week for upstate New York. Cold,
yeah,
but
right.
Here.
Northeast.
All right. So on today's episode, we'll be foregoing our usual buzzword and tech tip to discuss some of the top threats for businesses to look out for this year. Cybersecurity remains a top-of-mind concern for businesses of every size. It's a digital world out there, brimming with risks and opportunities. With the global cost of cybercrime expected to hit a jaw-dropping $10.5 trillion by 2025, it's clear we're in a race against sophisticated cyber threats. In this week's blog post, Top Threats for Businesses in 2024, we share some of the top potential threats we foresee happening this year. They include social engineering attacks, third-party security risks, cloud security, ransomware attacks, and poor data management, to name a few. So, out of all the potential cybersecurity threats, what do you see as the biggest concern for businesses in the new year? I'm going to open it to the floor. Who wants to go first? Who's got something for me?
I think that it's really a combination of these things. That's going to be the big threat is when things are combined. And the big thing that got left out of that list, which it's not really directly part of the list, is artificial intelligence and how artificial intelligence is going to be used to sort of glue these attacks together in ways that we've never seen before. And we're already seeing it, and even from better phishing emails to voice synthesis. Wow, I can speak to faking people's voices and voicemails and even interactive phone calls, and it's really ramped up very quickly. And we just saw recently that there was an attack against Microsoft, which used a I want to make sure I get this right. It was a test tenant that they had created for their own executives to try some features out, but somebody somehow made it so that the test tenant accounts had access to production data in another tenant. Which is something that's very easy to set up in Office 365. But because it was a test tenant, they had disabled all the higher level security, and a simple password was used to get into very high security data indirectly. And so, these kinds of combinations of attacks are going to become more prevalent, and it just goes to show how the low hanging fruit, is leads to a much bigger tree.
Yeah, I like I was thinking about that. I think the glue part. I think that's so accurate as far as AI. Because if you go down the list of some of these are like social engineering, Internet of Things, ransomware, like they do all tie back to AI and how AI can. I mean, even now, like phishing, right? Like you brought up that example. I mean, now attackers can come up with actual like proper English phishing emails where it just doesn't sound like obviously you don't speak English. I think another huge one, and again, this one does tie into AI too, like Internet of Things that's everywhere. I was listening to a podcast lately, and they're having issues with that hospitals too, where maybe my house, my internal thermostat that I like to do on my phone, that might not be the most critical device ever, but there are very critical devices in businesses, especially hospitals, where MRI machines, like just insane things that you would never think are hooked up to the internet. They miss a few patches. It's one of those things things like, especially big at IT, there's always that system that I'm very afraid to update because I know if something goes wrong, oh man, my entire weekend's gone, right? So it's like you take that update, you push it out, you push it out, you push it out. Very common. But now if we start talking about like very important pieces of equipment, that have Internet of Things in mission critical places like hospital and other kind of governmental infrastructure, all of a sudden that update that you pushed out very far, now there's an exploit that you don't even know, and somebody jumps in. So my money's on AI, sure, but Internet of Things I think is going to be huge. That's never going to stop expanding.
And the security is not going to get any better. Those not on the Internet of Things. That's what I'm referring to.
No.
Is this still a recommendation for business to keep all of those on a separate connection, separate circuit? Is that a
Absolutely.
Depends.
Well, all right. I will always agree with it depends. But I will. But I'll also. I also find it very easy to say that you should not keep any of these IoT devices on the same network as anything that has financial data or even access to accounts that then have access to financial data. It's just too dangerous, and for the cost of a managed switch that can handle keeping these things separate, we're talking about maybe an extra $100 to upgrade from an unmanaged to a managed switch these days. It's just not worth it to allow the IoT devices to have access to anything else. And very often, these devices don't get updated after a few years. A lot of them are from smaller businesses that just don't have the kind of programmers to keep their older equipment up to date. So I'll go with it depends, because if you have like all really nice new Google stuff and you make sure that you throw out everything before it goes EOL, then you have auto patching turned on, you could get away with it. But at the same time, if you knew how to do that, you could probably keep your network separate as well.
That makes sense. And I think the last time it came up, like for us, I want to say it was a compliance level. Like they were either a prime or a subcontractor, and so it was like you really can't. You have to have an entirely separate connection. Not even just segregating, say with us on the switch. But I think that's a little more of a stringent, where they've got CUI on their servers too. So
I think one of the crazy ones is I just redid my basement, and I went on Amazon and I bought like the cheapest like LED lights, the recessed ones to go in the ceiling. And I'm like, okay, they all connect to the internet, so I could just change the colors on the lights, but it's like they all have IP addresses, and these are made in China or wherever. And I'm just like, I got to download some weird app I've never heard before to connect to my Wi-Fi to get all these things connected. And all of a sudden now all these things exist where, exactly what Dan said, like, who knows how long these are going to be updated. I have no idea what foreign entity now has, control of my lights in my basement, and I have no clue.
Yeah, I'm guilty of having a mixture of all sorts of different devices, and I have the most trust in my IKEA devices over anything else, because it's a big company, and even though it's not like really as cool and fun as some of the cheap Chinese stuff that's out there, I feel like I can trust them a little bit better because they do put the programming behind it. At the same time, I also know that they just rolled out a new gateway, and that if I don't replace my gateway like over the next year or so, that it's going to get riskier and riskier to keep the IKEA stuff in place. But that's the cool thing about IKEA is the new gateway works with all the old lights, and I don't have to throw out my investment because I went with IKEA, which was more expensive to begin with, but in the long run, it might be a better use of my money.
that's interesting. That's at least they did that, right? Offered some way of of doing that, because I just kind of came into that situation. I did a refresh on my network at home, and I lost a whole bunch of my lighting and stuff that will not play on the new network. And I'm going to assume for a good reason, right? Like hopefully that told me something. But I think it was just the protocol they don't have the ability to talk to the newer protocol. But
It's tough when you see those like $50 Philips light bulbs, versus like the 4-cent Chinese ones. It's
yeah,
very tough, man. Tough choice.
IKEA falls in the middle. That's the other thing I like about them.
Exactly.
and I look at a lot of those, and even the branded applications for a lot of those are the same as the generic one that they recommend you could. It's just a little bit different skin, but it lets you know that if anybody reverse engineers or hacks into that one platform, that's probably over half of the devices they'd have access to. So, yeah, I thought you were actually being sarcastic at first, Dan. When you had about the IKEA, I didn't realize they actually had some thought into their platform.
Yeah. Look, IKEA has been a huge driver of bringing down the price of LEDs. I forget the exact price point, but when they started selling LED lights, they said that they were going to sell LEDs for, I think, $1 per bulb, which at the time was insane. Everybody else was selling them for like $8, $10, $12 per bulb. And I'm not talking about smart bulbs, just talking about bulbs.
On or off,
and they single-handedly worldwide drove down the price of LED bulbs, and then they took on the smart lights. And they don't really have the marketing out there that Philips does, and they don't sell their stuff at Home Depot. So you have to go to IKEA to find out about it.
There you go.
And then you get some meatballs and
right,
a bookshelf
and some temporary furniture.
Yeah.
All right. Today's episode brought to you by IKEA.
I was about to say, are we like, is FullScope officially
talking about IKEA?
So, is there anything else on the list? I know there was a longer list than the ones I mentioned, but anything else that you want to?
I want to tie in number 7, the poor data management. So I've been exposed to different versions of AI lately, and so I also want to bring in your point, Dan. And so there's a couple of organizations that simply do that. That's what they look at as your data, what's necessary, what's replicated, there's a lot of reasons organizations are losing money based on how they manage their data, which never even occurred to me, right, until I started to learn more about this. Well, one of those two companies uses AI as what's the machine behind determining some of these things. And the best part about that is because it can evolve, where the other company, although highly effective, and I would certainly recommend them, just uses a different approach. But the AI, from that standpoint, if you tie those two things together, and now you start to mitigate, it's like this version is almost endpoint style, like the way it looks at the network. And so it starts to try to pre-identify somebody that might be a risk based on their node, like and how they enter their data and where they do it and how they do it, and maybe whether that application is using two-factor or not, or whatever. But now imagine if we start getting notifications where your data has some issues and the user could probably use some more training. Like it's a pretty interesting way to do it, but that's where AI is for good, right?
Right.
Until it's not. But
I didn't want to start out with AI is bad, and I hope it didn't come off that way, because it's a tool like everything else, and if you use it for good, it will do good, and if you use it for bad, it will do bad. And it's really just gives us leverage with whatever we use it for, like any tool.
You kind of corrected yourself, so at least we knew you weren't AI when you said that earlier.
Right. Yeah, I try to be AI agnostic, but I think that data management is definitely a place where AI could be very powerful. because it can double check a lot of the work that we're doing. And one of the examples in the blog is that sending out an email incorrectly could be very costly for companies, because you could accidentally include data in an email that shouldn't be there, that's actionable. And AI could be trained to look for these kind of inconsistencies, and could save you a lot more money than the systems cost to set up.
I never thought about that, because even like the simple side, remember when might have been Gmail was the first platform I remember where if you wrote see the attachment but then you didn't attach it, it would actually stop you before it's sent and say, "Oh, hey, did you mean to attach them?" Like even as basic as that. Um, so I can only imagine, like what's been thought about.
Yeah, it goes way beyond simple pattern matching of the words, and gets more at the intent of what you're sending and what you're supposed to be communicating. Um, and these are the kind of products that are going to be the good AI.
Any other tips or tricks for businesses, or do we want to?
I'd say one, because I have I have a decent story for, because I remember configuration mistakes. This is one where it falls into the realm of like, if you're a business owner, it's like you know what you know, but you don't know like what you don't know, right? So it's tough sometimes. Like when you hire a vendor, you're just assuming that they're just going to take care of everything and that everything they do is great. I don't know if anybody's ever had home improvement done and has felt the effects of that's not always true. When you hire somebody, even if they're the best, they still make mistakes, right? I really think that configuration mistakes is something that nobody's ever going to know about, except for, I guess, if we're talking IT, obviously is going to be the IT firm. I had something that happened where in one of my old companies, I had one of my coworkers was configuring a firewall for a car dealership. And this was just, basic, hey, we need to get some third party company has to come in and do some work. Right. And he was having a tough time, opening firewall rules for whatever reason. And, and if you're not in IT, what happens is if you troubleshoot, spend a whole bunch of time, and all of a sudden you're like, I still don't understand what this is. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to open everything. I'm going to open the floodgates and just see if this works. Like if all the floodgates are open, then I can start closing like the individual gates, to see like what the actual cause is. So he opened the floodgates, and then all of a sudden it worked. The outside vendor could access it, and then he just kind of stopped, and then didn't go back and look at the individual floodgates. So at a technical level, he ended up, I think, he opened SSH fully inside for, I think it was about a month before we caught it. So, I think when I looked at the firewall logs, there was about 10,000 attempts to exploit SSH a day, um, from like all over the globe. So, moral of the story too would be, if you do have an IT company, for these kind of things, do make sure, even maybe quarterly or just periodically, there are tools internally that you could use to check configurations for these kind of misconfigurations. Because some oopsie like that, the business owner, they would literally never know something happened until it happened, and then possibly they hired a forensic firm to come in and say, "Oh, well, your IT company messed up and left this vulnerability open," and they would have never known that until something happened. So this is a big one, especially with businesses. Just to maybe mention to your IT company to see if they do have like internal checks, once a quarter. It doesn't have to be done every day, but just like once in a while, because these things can sneak by and they're just catastrophic if they're not caught. To scare everybody,
Even once a quarter feels way too long, the way you just said that.
I mean, it's real tough though, because these are to do a scan like this, especially configuration, to have somebody look at it. It's very like a detail oriented. You have to have an upper level tech. This isn't like this guy's second year. He can just come in and just check stuff. You're talking about a senior guy coming in, taking a look at the configuration, really looking at it and taking it apart. So hours and hours and hours of work.
Sounds like a
possibly.
job for AI.
It could be. We got to rename this podcast to be like AI something. Like this is basically what's going to turn into now, right?
It's such an interesting thing. Yeah, man. So what tipped him off? Did he just figure it out one day and like, oh my gosh, I never closed everything down? Or was there an incident?
Yeah, I want to give you like a really good answer of like how it was caught, but it was honestly like a month later, the company was having an issue with something completely non-related, and I was in the firewall and I couldn't figure it out, so I checked the access logs, and all of a sudden I'm seeing the access logs, like the log file itself was like a huge, like megabytes, and this is a text file, so it's huge, and I was like, there's no way that should be that large. So I looked in, and all of a sudden I see all these IP addresses trying to attack port 22, and I'm just like, damn, that's not good. that was not a fun conversation that he probably had with his boss.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your knowledge and insight, gentlemen. If you're interested in learning more about this topic, check out our blog post called Top Threats for Businesses in 2024. There will be a link in this week's episode description, and we will also have a link posted on our website, fullscopeIT.com. So that brings us to our story of the week.
This is the story of the week.
Listen up!
This week's story is brought to us by CBS News, and it is titled Family Scammed Out of $80,000 After Son Was Victim of Cyber Kidnapping. Boy, that's terrifying. Everybody get a chance to read that?
Yeah. Poor kid, too. Imagine just being here or being somewhere like out of your element, nowhere near people you know, places you know, and not being able to like communicate with what you believe your family's in trouble. That would just be terrifying. God, it was what, 17-year-old kid?
Do we want to give a summary?
Yeah, what was the gist
I'll
of
give
it?
a summary. So the gist of it was that this kid was studying in America. He's a Chinese citizen, and he was contacted by scammers who said that his family back in China was in danger if he didn't take himself and go out and away from everything and go like live in a tent. And then they set up 3-way phone calls where they controlled everything to make it seem like everybody was saying certain things and doing certain things. And so the family thought that he was with kidnappers, but he was just out in the woods. And the family gave them $80,000 before everybody figured it out, and the police went and found the kid and brought him back. And meanwhile, everybody was terrified. The people back in China thought their kid was in danger. The kid thought his family was in danger, and the criminals were nowhere near anybody. They were just safe in wherever they were, just taking the money in. And it is terrifying. And we keep hearing more and more of these kinds of attacks where people's concern for their families are being used to extort money from them. And it's hard for everybody to know that all these things are going on. But clearly the answer is don't believe people when they call and say your family's in danger. You should try to call them first and verify. They didn't mention AI in the article, but some of them have involved AI where they've faked people's voices using
Those
videos,
are the ones that I've heard.
TikTok videos and Instagram, and they get enough of your voice recording and they can fake your voice. So you need to call whoever you think is calling you and make sure it's really them. And sometimes you can shut it down very quickly, but that fear sets in and you just want to do whatever you think is right at that second to keep your family safe. And I can understand how people would just pay the money before verifying.
That's tough too, because it's like so now it's like, as an average person who's not in IT field, you have to be like, okay, they could be spoofing my relative's phone number, right? So even if the phone number comes in as, mom, dad, it might not be them. So we got to worry about that. This, like you said, you got to worry about AI. Like if you say you have a podcast or something, they can take all of your voice and they could just feed it through AI and make a phone call that sounds exactly like you. I don't know if you guys watch TikTok, but I keep getting TikTok ads about if you read your voice to this AI, it can have your voice like sing popular songs and stuff, and it sounds exactly like you. So that's the thing with the AI; it's only getting better. Right now, it's the worst it's ever going to be. Like it's never going to go up and then down. It's only going to get better. So it's tough to be like, I'm a normal person. I have to know that AI could be, faking a voice. I have to know that a phone number could be faked. I have to know like all this other stuff. Or again, if you're sitting there, your adrenaline's going, and you think that you got to pay 20 grand, or something happens to one of your relatives, you're in a tough spot.
Well, it's good that these kinds of stories are being picked up by mainstream news outlets. That is probably the best defense that we have, is that there is still media out there that reports the truth.
The tough one too is like, especially with that article, if he's not a United States citizen, it's tough. I think a lot of the time to call the police, they're like afraid to do that, because I mean, not to get political or anything, but I think a lot of other countries view our policing system a lot differently. So I think in that case, yeah, I mean that's a little different. But normally, yeah, I mean, I would call the cops any single time anything. That would be my first call. I'm not going to sit there and play detective.
I think it's a good idea to contact the authorities. The video, they interview the police in the video, and they talk about how the police are specifically trained to help spot scams like this, and they can help put an end to it very quickly. But just as importantly, the more that they know that this is going on, the more that they know that this is an important part of their job, and that they should be putting the effort into the training and the ability to recognize these scams and help other people in the future. And also, as I mentioned, you can reach out to the family member that supposedly is at risk, or is making, being part of making the demands, and verify that they are really in trouble or not. In addition to working with the police.
There's two things that I was thinking about, Matthew, when you were talking. So, one, like any of the social media things where they get you involved, to me just seems like a information demographic grab. Always. Like, oh, hear your voice singing this thing. Oh, we just want your voice. And we want it to say as many words as possible. Yeah. And we want to be able to, like, man. That's all I think. Right. I mean, it's a problem. So we have this conversation too much for me not to kind of think in that way a lot, right? Because this is what we deal with all day long. And then the other side of it, like, so this story, what I have local here, which I'm sure all of you do too, is it's people calling on the behalf of authorities to the grandparents that their grandchild is in trouble and got into an accident or something. And so that's how they're extorting the money to help. I mean, what elderly person doesn't want to help their grandchildren, right? And they get them into a panic. They get them flustered. They know how to talk. One side of my family, my in-laws, they keep getting someone that's knocking on their door saying they have an appointment with them to talk about medical information. And we identified that it was the same people. And then their neighborhood, because of like the doorbells, we started to compare, and they've been kind of casing their neighborhood as a whole. And so we actually got the authorities involved, got enough pictures of these people. And sure enough, this couple were scam artists, and they were literally going door knocking, like old school prey scenario. But I mean, it's the same scam, right? It's the same scam every time with just these slight differences.
I have been thinking lately that the sheer volume of the AI attacks as it grows is going to make those old school attacks more powerful, because everybody's going to be talking about, the AI attacks are coming and watch out for the AI attacks. And you're not going to think somebody knocking on your door is going to be a scammer anymore, because they're not AI, they're a person at the door. And it does it does increase that risk to amplify all the regular old scams that have been out there for years and years.
And hopefully we haven't been so desensitized to other humans by that point that we can still pick up on some of the cues. I mean, that's just it, right? We're so used to interacting digitally, and we lose some of that. Obviously, kind of in my role in life, I'm still talking to a lot of people and having a lot of regular conversations, but there's plenty of us that don't. There's plenty of us that read our conversations. And so you lose picking up on the inflections and cues of people, or good old analog scams are going to come back.
Just to prove that we're not all doom and gloom here at FullScope IT, we have a bonus second story of the week. This one comes to us from IT Brew, and it is titled Metallica, Blink-182, and Other Passwords You Shouldn't Use. Okay. Who wants to tee this one up?
I liked the article. Without teeing it up too much, I don't think I have ever used some of my interests in passwords. I don't know if I knew better, so the story was just a who's the password company out of it.
What is NordPass? It says NordPass
it was NordPass
and revealed some of 2023's most commonly used passwords.
Yeah, so they identified some of the most common passwords that were related to things that we would do or the whole, like, what's your anniversary, what's your dog's name, and then you could probably figure out most people's passwords, right? So this was related to cultural things, cars that we drive, music that we listen to, things like that, right? So we identified a couple of funny things out of this, I think, that are a good conversation. So password, apparently Metallica is the number one band of all time, according to a password usage.
Yeah.
Sounds like it.
And the number one over at Minecraft for online games, 30,000 unique accounts. In Fortnite. That's funny. And then Mamma Mia 78. I don't know how that made the list, but
that was interesting. That one was interesting.
The one that I used to see all the time is just anniversary dates. So it'd be like November 21 ! Like that's your password.
Yeah.
Meets all the requirements.
I thought this was like extremely valuable information to any marketing company. I was like, oh, okay. So people with these interests tend to use them in their life.
I got to go and update all my Alfa Romeo passwords.
There you go.
I got to change that.
I like how the article is. It's very, it's written for like the common person. This is not an article for IT professionals. We should all know better than this. But the important thing is you have to be able to have these conversations with everybody who does anything online these days, especially if they're tying their accounts into anything financial. And as we were saying earlier, even tying it into things that aren't financial, getting the information in your accounts can be leveraged in ways you can't even think about. So if somebody gets all of your pictures and all of your videos, they can make a virtual you, and then use that against you later on. But hopefully, it gets people thinking that I can't just use these simple passwords for anything. And the thing I took out of this is at the end they did mention that they saw a lot of Metallica and Blink-182, but they were not seeing anything about Taylor Swift. And and they question why that is. And I can only guess that it's because people who listen to Taylor Swift are much smarter.
Yes.
I'll,
You got to play
I'll
both
leave out
sides,
anything
man.
that sounds
love that.
ageist or
Right?
anything else.
I was surprised there
I don't
wasn't
know.
more
Prince is on
Star
the list,
Wars.
too.
Yes,
True.
but he's on the low end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was.
You know, I
that
think
was interesting.
I really don't mean to be ageist, but I think that for those of us that have been using the internet and passwords for much longer, when this all started out, we had one password. You know, you had your AOL dial-up password, and there was no other password, and you just made it something that was cool for you. And it was very easy to slide into reusing these simple passwords for things that you were interested in. And even though I consider myself a digital native, the younger people who are younger than me who really are truly digital natives, they've grown up with hearing about how passwords are important, and they've been inundated with the number of passwords that they have to have very, very quickly. And I think that it's not an ageist thing, like, you know, you're old, you don't know any better. It's that we just weren't confronted with it early on in the internet.
I think there's a lot of conflicting information too, as far as like what should I have my password, and then companies throughout time, because this is like an age old question, like this whole thing we're talking about too, and a lot of things too is like companies are like, yep, got to change your password every 2 months, every 3 months, which just led to people being like, okay, cool, sure, winter 2024 exclamation is now my password. Now my password is now spring 2024. So it led to that. So now it swung the other way where I'm telling customers, well, like once a year, you probably want to, because you want to avoid simplistic passwords, but then they'll balk at that. I think as far as solutions, it's like a good, better, best thing. I like password managers. So if you go to LastPass, say what you will about, they had a couple compromises, but them, Keeper, like, if you could just save a very complex password in your browser, that's very helpful. Or the thing that I've taught myself over time is multi-factor authentication for everything, which is, everybody's used to logging in their bank and they're texted like a 6-digit code. Anything that you sign up for, like 99% of everything nowadays, you can just go into security settings and enable that. So if I put in my username and password, I always get text a code. So even if you're like, you know what, I'm not going to remember, I'm going to use the same password for literally everything in the universe, I can still enable MFA on every single one of those pages, and it's going to text me a unique code. So even if an attacker or, really angry ex-girlfriend or ex-boyfriend like knows your password and tries to go after you, like that code is still text to you. Sure, we can get into the whole SMS spoofing stuff, but for the most part, it's like, now that's secure. So I can have the same password for everything. Not super recommended, but, it's just one of those things where I think nowadays that should kind of be pushed as far as like, that's the new standard, how MFA should be default on everything. And if it's not, the common person should take one step further and just make sure they, multi-factor, 2-factor, whatever authentication, and, put their phone number in or however that goes.
I'm really hoping 2024 is the year of the pass key, but it's not looking good
Wishful
so far.
thinking.
Yeah, very wishful thinking. But a lot of a lot of sites allow you to authenticate with your phone and the biometric security on your phone, and there's a huge advantage to that because there's no password involved at all. It's your biometric signature and your physical device that you have to have on you, and it stops things like the SMS attacks where people steal your phone number so they can get your MFA codes. But it's not being adopted fast enough, and the standards aren't being followed perfectly, even by some of the big players like Microsoft, who prefer to play nicely with everything but Google.
Mm. Yeah, if we're really trying to help, we can't play favorites.
Yeah.
I don't know. What I heard there is that we're struggling for like education, right? If anything, like that evolution you're talking about, Matthew, and like Dan, like what you said at first, like we thought this, and then we were introduced to this, and then like we really don't know what the big picture is as a consumer. Like maybe some of us in tech do, but the consumers don't really have any idea of where this is going or how to do it. I remember one of my like change this every 60-day passwords was I hate changing this password exclamation. Like it was
Such
just,
a rebel.
it was
You're a rebel,
yeah,
man.
I'm sure everybody else did the same damn thing and with a few explicitives in there, but it was a pain in the butt. And then recently to find out like, oh, you really don't have to do that. I knew it. like I knew I didn't have to do that. But that's also, I mean, if we all started with that one password, like you said, Dan, right, with the email, and then it was like, oh, 5 other things. Oh, how am I going to remember that? I'll just use the same one. That should be fine. It's a good password. Won't matter. And then later you find out even like dark web stuff, like, oh, my stuff is easily found. Like that's a problem. Okay, it doesn't matter how complex if it was still available, right? But yeah, we're creatures of habit. But education.
One of the top 10 passwords was always "I love you," and that has gotten blown off the top 10 list. I think that's very telling how cynical the world has become about the internet.
Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of the FullScope Cybercast, Safeguarding the Digital Frontier. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. So until then, stay behind your firewall.